So yeah, my name is Dr. Catriona Paul. I'm at the University of Limerick, but this project began life at the University of Dundee, where I was based. And it's a history project. I know we have scholars from across lots of different fields here, so I thought I would launch with an image taken from the period I'm interested in. It's an image that was published in London in 1779, and it's the title of it, which I couldn't quite squeeze on the screen, is The Horse America Throwing His Master. And it's a print that was published during the War of Independence, or the Revolutionary War, depending on how you perceive things. And it shows the King George III, being unseated from his horse after having abused that horse. And you can see in his hand that he's been lashing the horse with a rather nasty combination of sabers, swords, and we also have a native tomahawk or axe that has been used. And that rather suggested what the colonists had been going through, that they had been ill-used by the British royalty there, and therefore they were entitled to throw off mastery and rule and go their own way. So the period of time that I'm interested in Kentucky history begins just in advance of that War of Independence and continues for a couple of decades thereafter. And there is a kind of literal truth in this image, in that Kentucky was settled, and I say that in inverted commas. It was invaded, if you like, by colonists, not least because they had access to horses that would enable them to migrate over the Appalachian Mountains into what was euphemistically called America's First West, the states that ran along the western ridge of the Appalachian Mountains. So this is perhaps my start point for today's today's lecture. But I would also like to get you to think about an end point, and that's where I'd like you to think about how Kentucky relates to horses in today's context. And some of you may know that Kentucky has a £1 billion industry based around horse racing, and in particular the thoroughbred racehorse. And there are two images on the screen that are taken from the official visitor's guide published by the Kentucky Tourism Office, which feature, as you can see, horses front and center, and pretty much every cover is a horse if you flick through the brochures. The one on my left, hopefully it's your left too, from 2008, also features the state logo, which is Kentucky Unbridled Spirit. When I began this project, this is actually the thing that really piqued my interest, because I think in the title Unbridled Spirit, it also brings to mind the idea of the bridle itself, which, for those of you who don't know horses, that's the piece of tack that goes around the horse's head with a metal bit between its teeth and its mouth to control the horse. So a bridle can be kind of an implement of control and sometimes pain. And here in this logo, we have unbridled spirit, this idea of, I think the tagline was a place where spirits can soar, but it's also bringing into mind this idea of control and coercion, which has a human application as well, because in the period that I'm studying, we have a whole history of slavery to look at in relation to human relationships with horses and the growth of horse racing in the bluegrass. So I think maybe the Kentucky Tourist Board picked up on something that wasn't quite right with their logo. And in the more recent version, in 2023, we have the rainbow horses, which are actually the title for that work of art or art installation was Unified Race, which I find quite interesting. But my point is that Kentucky sort of markets itself and its identity as having this affinity with horses. And I really try to explore that in my work and kind of the historic beginnings. There are a lot of states in the US that have a relationship with horses. Why has Kentucky kind of grabbed the crown, if you like, in relation to the thoroughbred? I also mentioned there just briefly that there are some really troubling aspects to this relationship that I'm looking at. It's not as if it's all that positive, bright and shiny image that we just saw on the tourism board. So a big part of what I look at in my work is the relationship between humans, horses, and a dependence within horse racing on enslaved labor. So I'm quite happy to talk about that some more. There's a different troubling aspect to the human-equine relationship that I promised to speak about today in relation to war. So let me take you to another troubling image, which will kind of, again, help us get back back into the time period we need to be considering today. So the image on your screen is called The Charge of the US Dragoons at the Battle of Fallen Timbers. The battle itself took place in 1794. It really was seen as the last battle for control of the territory in the Northwest. And after that, in 1795, a treaty was concluded, which more or less excluded Native Americans from the Northwest and pushed them further westwards, clearing land to make it available for settler colonists. This imagined scene was actually drawn 100 years later in 1895. And I could offer you more detail about the battle itself, but what I really want you to focus on at this Battle of Fallen Timbers is the image of the horse, which is center screen. And it appears to be bearing down on the Native American who is shooting one of the other mounted riders, and seems to have linked fortunes with the US Dragoon who is riding the grey horse in the center of the screen. The slightly disturbing version of history that I found on the Army Historical Foundation, which is the National Museum of the US Army, the official kind of history keeper for the US Army, described what happened at the Battle of Fallen Timbers. It was called the Battle of Fallen Timbers because, as you can see from the image, a lot of trees had been downed in a wind event, some description of tornado, I think. And when this attack went down, Native American forces were attacked by infantrymen, and then as they retreated, they were charged down by these light horsemen, by these dragoons. And this is the description that the official history keepers of US Army history write. The Indians fled so fast that mounted troops on the flanks had difficulty catching them. Nonetheless, dragoons from the Legion charged headlong at the log barriers like jockeys at a steeplechase, cutting down the Indian warriors with their sabers. The dragoons' charge completed the rout. Now that's quite a disturbing description of carnage. But as I said, what I want you to focus on, with it being an animal studies grouping here, is the depiction of the horse. Neck outstretched, ears pinned back. It seems, in what is usually interpreted as a sign of aggression, the horse seems intent on harming the Native American. With the reins relaxed, the horse does not need to be guided to its target. It knows for itself who the enemy is. Here we have an alliance of settler colonial soldier and horse bent on destroying a native enemy, an image that was celebrated at the end of the 1890s when it was published in Harper's Magazine. Another image for you to consider, which also has quite disturbing overtones, is an image of a statue that until very recently was at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. It's known as the George Rogers Clark Monument, and it depicts the conquest of this area of America, the Northwest, by George Rogers Clark. The statue was created in the 1920s. We can go into the history of 1920s Virginia, which wasn't pretty. And it's occupied a space on campus in Virginia until 2021. I'll tell you a little bit about the history of George Rogers Clark. He's being represented here as this conqueror of the Northwest because he achieved a victory against the British at Fort Sackville in Vincennes, which was seen as being very important when negotiations went down after the War of Independence about the extent of territory that this new America should be granted. But his attitudes towards Native Americans was notorious. He was particularly brutal. And although this victory at Fort Sackville is often reported as having gone down without loss of life, quote, the British governor who was in the fort only conceded after the murder of 4 native allies of the British who were butchered at the gates of the fort, to show the intent of George Rogers Clark on seizing the fort itself. But here's a statue to him, as I said, completed in 1921 and on full display. In 2021, a racial equity task force in Charlottesville at the university recommended that the statue, be removed with the advice that the university should demonstrate its rejection of previous support for white supremacist ideology by removing all symbols that honor the Confederacy, genocide, or eugenics. The following week, the statue was then daubed with red paint, and a little while thereafter, it was removed. Now, may I ask you to focus on that image of the horse? Here we have Clark astride, holding the horse back with taut reins. Below him, 3 figures. One Native American man stands defiant and proud. The image of the noble savage that 1920s America could romanticize and celebrate now the threat had passed. On the ground, another warrior is down and a woman cowers. If you can see in the back here what looks like a shield, it was actually a baby being held aloft on a cradle board, which was one of the ways that babies were carried on the backs of Indigenous women at this time. And she is represented as begging for the life of her infant. We can be in no doubt that this horse is represented as helping Clark achieve his victory, this pivotal final moment of triumph and surrender. It is the horse that's creating the supremacy of Clark. He is on high, he is up above, because he is astride a horse. So there's 2 very different kind of representations of this relationship between settler colonists and horses. We could go wider on this and talk about animals, other animals, but we'll stick with horses. We have limited time. This relationship between settler colonists and animals has been observed by a number of historians and animal studies scholars who have looked to analyze and challenge the relationship. So I just wanted to give you a little grounding there about some of the people I'm reading and thinking about. So I suppose Virginia de John Anderson, Creatures of Empire, came out in 2004, really broke new ground in thinking about the relationship that settler colonists had with their animals. And she pretty much pitched domesticated animals as doing the hard work of colonization, often kind of pressing into virgin territory, as it would have been seen, and transforming landscapes and also bridging gaps with Indigenous people. Andrea Smalley more recently has written about wild animals and how they were commodified within a system of capitalism, furs, etc. And so again, she's looking at relationships of humans and animals within colonial framework. Some academics within animal studies have argued that animals in North America can only be understood through a paradigm of settler colonialism. And I direct you there to Billy Ray Belcourt, who has argued for recognition of animal bodies as colonial subjects, given an identity and a use that was contingent upon and defined by the needs and objectives of the colonial state and its citizens. And this further quoted there, the animal body must always...
Hiya, Catriona. We keep losing you. I think when you're reading, you're kind of moving away from the speaker. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, thank you for interrupting.
Sorry.
No worries. No worries. I didn't realize I was moving around very much. So I will please say if it drops off again. So Belcourt, yeah, he wants us all to think about animals in North America in the context of colonialism. He suggests that they were always understood and constructed through the kind of needs of settler colonists. And they were open to misrecognition in that context as well, which I'll hopefully return to. But there has been a little pushback from other academics within the field of animal studies who suggest that it's all very well to understand animals within this paradigm, but they also have their own agency, they have their own interests, their own stories, and that they are not taking sides. They are always on their own side. And as you can see there, there's a quote from Fiona Probyn-Rapsey and Lynette Russell. And they have recommended what we call a triadic approach, always involving at least three sides: settler, colonizer, indigene, and animal. So I suppose that's what I'm pitching at when I'm looking at the sources and the history that I'm writing. But the challenge of trying to undo settler, kind of see through settler colonialism and reveal it sort of at play in the sources I have is quite a challenge. And I think I can make that apparent if I bring to your attention the Shane interviews, which really provide the meat for this discussion, you know, for the research I've been doing on this early period of colonization in Kentucky. Give me a thumbs up, Jane, if you can still hear me now. Yes, excellent. So in the 1840s, a Reverend, the John Dabney Shane, went around Kentucky and interviewed about 400 people who had lived through the first kind of wave of settler colonialism in the 1770s and 1780s. And also they recalled things that happened in the 1790s. He wrote down the interviews. That's what I've been working with, amongst other things. They kind of evidence settler colonialism in action. They talk about migration into the region. They are full of stories of warfare. They detail life in the forts and stations of the period of the time, and there's some discussion about family life and family death, which is a big feature of these accounts. Horses feature in pretty much every single account, and you couldn't really get to Kentucky without relying on horses. Even if you traveled down the Ohio River on a flat bottom barge, you were taking horses with you to make this first West work. So that was very apparent when I began work on them. But I think coming back to them recently, I thought really the thing that sticks in my head is the fact that horses and death seem to line up in so many of the accounts. And that was because of the huge levels of interpersonal violence that were occurring in Kentucky in this period. And I will say more about that, but essentially colonists are, you know, they're going to war with Native American forces to occupy the land. Also, what came through in the accounts was that horses were being understood, their behaviors and actions, as being on the side of the colonists, which harks back to the images I showed you at the beginning of horses being represented as taking the side of colonists against a native enemy. So my challenge is really, how do I counter that narrative? You know, how do I see through the colonial settler viewpoint without kind of kicking the feet out of their own lived experiences? And my approach that I'm trialing with you today is that I have given a fair amount of attention to the instincts, behaviors, and physiology of the horses themselves to explain the behaviors, rather than simply falling back on what people told themselves at the time, which was that horses preferred colonists, settler colonists, and disliked, made ethnic judgments about Native Americans. So just checking the time there. So we're okay, good. Right. So I'm going to give you some specific examples from the Shane interviews, and I will come back to them. But I also thought I'd better do a bit more history with you, so that the stories I'm going to tell you, the little excerpts from the Shane interviews, make sense. So for those of you who didn't know or couldn't remember, here's Kentucky on the map. It's just west of Virginia, but there's the Appalachian Mountains running down the east coast here, in from the East Coast and providing what was seen as a natural boundary to the original colonies. But from the 1760s onwards, you have what they were called long hunters, people who would go west to try and make the most of access to furs and hides. Bison would come all the way into Kentucky from the far west to seek out salt licks and mineral licks. So Kentucky was a great place to go hunting. And as I said, from the 1760s, hunters were going in there, even though the British wanted to keep them out. From the 1770s, as I've mentioned before, you have colonists intent on settling that and turning it into agricultural farmed land. I've also been talking about a sort of fight for the whole of the Northwest, which is shown here. And that's the wider conflict of which Kentucky is a part. So even when Kentucky appears to be fairly safely in American hands, there's this whole other region, just like, well, this whole region of which it's a part, just north of the Ohio River. And you're going to hear me talk about the Ohio River. This wiggly line that separates Kentucky from Ohio and other states to the north is actually the Ohio River. So for a large part of the period I'm looking at, the Northwest Territory was seen as native land, and Kentucky has begun to be taken over as a colonial settlement. And this natural river, natural feature of the river is the dividing line between the communities. So just to, as I said, give you a couple more things. The upper Ohio Valley, that is the area north of Kentucky, was very settled in the period when colonists arrived. There were a large number of native peoples living there in sort of multicultural, multilingual villages. These villages were agrarian, they were settled, they had access to horses before before East Coast Europeans arrived. They traded east and west, bringing in horses from the far west, which had come up through Spanish routes. These were quite affluent communities that were put up with fierce resistance to encroachment by colonists. And there's just a contemporary drawing to show the settlement, this agrarian village world. A lot of the time, Native Americans are not represented as having village life, but here we have a very settled, prosperous community. When the settlers arrive, one more visual, they throw up these cabins and forts to try and make good their land claims. They're pretty basic, but they do provide some protection for settlers. And these are replicas of the earliest ones that were set up there. When the American Revolution kicks off, Kentucky becomes super, super violent. So in 1777, the British want to open up a second front. So they're fighting on the East Coast against the colonists. They want to open up a second front, and they decide to target backcountry settlers, including the people in Kentucky. And they arm native forces to go in there against settler colonists. Native goals would be to clear settler colonists from native land. But as I said, there's this huge boom in sort of violent activity. And the map indicates all of the places where confrontations occurred, whether it was sieges of those kind of forts that I've shown you, or whether there was running battles and confrontations out with the forts. So how were horses involved in this conflict, of which I've given you the bare bones? They did, of course, increase the mobility. I'll try and talk to the screen again. The mobility, speed, and strike range of both sides, of both colonists and Native Americans. They could also make the difference for individuals who found themselves kind of in one-on-one situations or being confronted on the traces, as they called them, and trails in and out of Kentucky. A lot of migrants were targeted. On horseback, there was a chance of outrunning an attack, and that happened for two men who were cited there, James Morris and Captain John Dial. But in other respects, they were a liability. If they were within the forts, they needed to be released to forage and to find water. There were many accounts of horrific violence ensuing when colonists went to retrieve roaming horses and were picked off essentially by Native American forces. Horses became a kind of a target. So they were stolen by both sides, kind of run to and forth across the Ohio River at regular intervals. And I would query their use in pitched battles. They were quite good for getting you to the enemy, which, but once confrontations occurred, men frequently had to dismount to use their firearms. So I can talk more to that, but I want to get back to this idea of horses taking sides, which is where I started. So I'll move swiftly on. So I suggested that the images I showed you are kind of a continuation of a sense that animals were on the side of the colonists, and this came through in the interviews, in the Shane interviews that I've introduced. In the first place, Euro-Americans felt that horses warned them of danger. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Samuel Boyd was out near a place called Maysville, and he remembered one night in the fall of 1795 when the horses came running up to the cabin, quote, snorting and frightened. The next day, Boyd and his neighbors learned of a fatality at the Long Lick carried out by Native Americans. For Boyd, the presence of Native Americans in the woods the previous day explained why his horses had been upset, and their behavior had indicated danger. Similarly, Samuel McDowell reported his mare taking great fright, quote, while on a trail. Concluding that something was not right, he put-whipped the mare and set off at a fast pace down the road. A mile further on, he spotted moccasin tracks. Continuing 5 or 6 miles further down the road, he encountered a company from Cox's station in pursuit of an indigenous party who had attacked the station and taken several captives. The company caught up with the Native Americans. That night, one captive had been killed, but a woman and a boy were safely retrieved. In this instance, as before, McDowell's account suggested that the horse had known something was wrong before the rider detected it. By their behavior, horses appeared to warn settler colonists of danger. These testimonies linked the nervous behavior of the animals to the presence of Indigenous Americans and implied that horses associated persons of a particular ethnicity with danger and threat. However, if we pause to consider the equine view of the situations outlined, we find an alternative explanation to the horse behavior described. So considering horses' senses, we will get a different explanation of what was really going on. Horses are prey animals whose senses are highly attuned to detect threat and whose instinct is to run from danger. They have a greater field of vision. They have better hearing. They have a better sense of smell. They can pick up on faint noises from a distance of 4 kilometers. With these advantages of perception, horses were more likely than humans to sense the presence of other animals, including humans, in the woods and canebrakes that abounded in Kentucky. And they were also hardwired to think of that noise that they didn't know where it came from as a threat, and to convey that. They had a number of ways of being able to convey that to riders through agitating to go faster, or conversely showing a reluctance to proceed. Horses could also pick up on the cues of human handlers, voice and smell. So if a person was nervous of attack, this would be conveyed to the horse, who would respond with sensitivity to that. And finally, horses and humans have developed interspecies trust over generations, but they will always trust somebody they know over somebody they don't know. So equine trust of familiar humans would always come before, equine trust of familiar humans might be extended to unfamiliar ones where a similar pattern of handling is adopted. However, if human behavior becomes unpredictable and threatening, then horses will revert to identifying humans as a threat and a possible predator. Equine physiology, behavior, and instincts explain the seeming equine preference for the Euro-Americans riding and caring for them, and the fear of the unpredictable unknown attempting to conceal presence in the trees. It was not a preference for one ethnicity over another. The fact that it was explained that way, why are the horses scared, Indians in the vicinity, speaks to settler colonialism and the ways that it framed and dealt meaning to human relationships and interspecies ones too. Now, I'll just check on my time. So I have a couple of other things that I just wanted to share with you before I wrap up for today. There were many examples in these accounts of where it seemed that as though colonists and horses were linked. So Mrs. Wilson, she was a young girl who was captured along with other members of her family, and was carried north to the British. On making this long walk north as a captive, she came across horses that had also been stolen when Ruddle Station was raided. And she recalled to the interviewer how she spotted the horse and how she was taunted by Indigenous people who were riding the horse, 3 on the back of this one horse, and treating it very roughly. And her brother wanted to claim the horse for himself and say, that's our animal, but he couldn't do so because there were 900 Native Americans in the vicinity who would have denied his ownership. And in recalling what happened to the animal, it felt as though she was recalling something of her own suffering. The horses appeared momentarily to remind the girl and her brother of the family life that had been destroyed, the animal suffering mirroring that of the children. I think it's quite fascinating what was remembered for 20 or 30 or 40 years and then recounted in these interviews. And I'll give you one more example. We have an interviewer called William Risk, who remembered an Indigenous raid on a settlement on Stoner River that resulted in a colt being orphaned, that is a young horse being orphaned. 5 horses were stolen in this Indigenous raid. One, a mare that belonged to Risk's father, had a young colt in tow. Knowing the nickering colt would follow its mother and hinder their retreat, the Native Americans took the mare off to the side of the road and killed her. After the shooting, the colt was seen running distraught up and down the trace, presumably searching for its mother, eventually returning to the family farm once the alarm bell ceased ringing. The lost colt was the most salient feature of the interview. Shane clarifies in parenthesis how many times it passed the settler colonists as they pursued horse thieves, and it raced up and down the trace. Risk had not witnessed the incident himself, but the story of the running colt had been passed on and remembered. The orphan colt was an innocent victim of Native Americans' cruelty in this account, remembered in more detail than some of the child victims that had fallen. Something about the panicked young horse and the futility of its search up and down the trace had made a lasting impression. Bereaved settler colonists appeared to empathize with the lost and desperate colt. Now, there are other accounts in the Shane interviews about horses taking sides, being prepared to take a bullet for settlers, saving the lives of settlers by outrunning. There's a great one where the horse has been shot 5 times, but he outruns an attack, and through equine sacrifice, the settler lives on. And I think there's a number of ways in which, through these interviews, you get the impression that the settlers believed that the horses were there for them, that they were there to support and further the colonial settlement. So I'd just like to conclude, and I haven't said much about horses unlocking the past, but I can come to that in any questions that follow on. So I'd like to conclude by offering these few words that I was thinking about. We need to work hard, I think, when we have a set of sources like the one I've been talking about, these Draper interviews. We need to work hard to reveal the human-equine relationships that existed in a distant, faraway time for what they were, and not to add them uncritically to a narrative in which horse and colonist tower triumphantly over a defeated and vanishing native people. Part of the solution to this is to find equine agency in the story of what happened in Kentucky, alongside recognition that horse bodies and identities were constructed through the prism of settler colonialism. This means recognizing that horses acted in their own interests in the conditions that prevailed, sometimes trusting the colonists they knew over the unidentified threat in the brush. This did not add up to an equine preference for one race over another, and it was not evidence of better care or horsemanship on the part of colonists. However, this impression, this interpretation was put on horse actions and behaviours by settler colonists who lived intimately with horses, sharing space, sharing touch, sharing danger, sharing death. And this belief helped sustain them through desperate circumstances. It carried its own weight and would feed into a new narrative of state pride from the 1790s long into the 1800s and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catriona. That was absolutely fascinating. I've been scribbling away. So I think we'll head straight into Łucja. That's correct. If you could share your screen, please, Łucja. Not scare your screen, share your screen. And then we'll say, if you can hang on to your questions till the end, and then we'll try and address as many of them as we can after Łucja's finished her presentation. So we'll be aiming to finish, Łucja, at about 10 past. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay, magic. I'll let you get on then. Okay. Thank you very much, Łucja.
Yeah, I needed to unmute, and to do so, I needed to switch off the presentation for a moment. But I think now I can present. Yeah, you see the presentation. Okay. So for me, there are some questions with which I'm coming to this seminar. For first, I'm interested in how we construct the idea of non-human refugee. The second one is how are we prepared to deal with the toll of wars, disasters, and extinction. And the third one is how the issues of welfare, animal welfare, are appearing and disappearing from the scope when disasters and wars happen. And a spoiler alert, I won't answer them directly, as these are very complex questions. And also a trigger warning, because there are some photos of animals in distress, so I hope we will skip smoothly through them. Okay, so the next slide. Okay, I need to go. So I would like to start with the film The Flow, which is now having the premiere in Poland, and all the media is now writing about this solidarity, friendship, and hope in this film, that animals can do it, and together they will just go through any kind of distress and disaster. And this is something with which I cannot agree, but okay, I'm taking it to the board, and I hope we will, maybe I will switch to the showcase, it will be better. Oh. Okay, once again. So, let us come to the main subject and look at the initial situation that made me wonder, why are we able to give one human or non-human the status of refugee and the other we see as a threat? We have here the two stories which occur 6 months apart. The war in Ukraine caused much more interest in companion animals than any prior military conflict. the media feeds tend to see the harm of war and name the non-humans the silent victims. But the situation 6 months prior to the humanitarian crisis due to war in Ukraine. The first photo is from August 2021. Near Usnasz Górny, a group of 33 people were held in a camp. They couldn't cross Polish border, they couldn't cross Belarusian border because no one wanted them in the country. Those people were from Afghanistan. One girl, Miriam, she had a cat. Of course, most of the people engaged in this situation from Polish side, the photo reporters, the journalists, the human aides, they were taking photos of that girl. I remember it well because all the media footage was covered with this kind of photos, this one and the second one. And I remember the colors, the red, yellow, and the blue cat. Of course, in the comments, in the public voices of the politicians, it was said that we cannot give those people the refugee status. Of course, there were questions. Why does she have a purebred cat with her? So really questions that shouldn't appear. But in Poland, we were not so eager to give them refuge. And then we have this second photo. And this is from February 2022. So this is the crisis where people from Ukraine are trying to escape together with their animals, with their pets. And I see the same colors, red, yellow, and the blue cat. This is the photo taken in Lviv at the train station. And the photo is also in many Polish and not only Polish papers, and people are very triggered by it and are saying, okay, we need to help. We need to help, we need to change the law to proceed faster and give those people the help they need. So what happened here? How the same breed of cat is triggering and is something that we discuss because we don't like people from Afghanistan, but if they are from Ukrainian, we may see the same cat as someone we would like to welcome in our country. Okay, so this is disturbing for me. I don't know if it is also disturbing for you. So we skip from wars to disasters. Of course, we will come back to wars. And this is the situation which we had in September last year, 2024, in Poland. We had a big flood, which was, of course, unexpected. These are the triggering photos. And some animals were, of course, taken with the owners, with the caretakers, and other animals were just left alone. Mostly they were restrained on a leash or with the chains. they were in cages, small cages. They didn't have the chance to survive, mostly. There was a situation that one man left a dog, a bunch of rabbits, and also pigeons that he didn't release. He just kept them in locked cages, so they drown. Some of the wild animals managed to survive, to help themselves, but the irony is that they didn't have any help, they didn't have any kind of support. They were just using trash, our trash, which we leave in forests, which we left on the streets. So it was the irony that this one time the trash was helpful. But it also gives me this kind of thought that maybe we shouldn't look at this kind of situation that our trash helped someone. But this is something like in this film Flow, where the animals are using things that are left behind by us. Okay, but the next case, extinction. We really like to romanticize it. We think about it, and still we notice, but not always, that some animals, some non-human animals, are not with us anymore. We stay in denial for many reasons, but the two of them are mentioned here. For example, if we know that some wild animals disappeared, they are extinct, probably we didn't see them, so it is not our problem, we don't care. If there are insects, probably we don't like them or don't see them, so it is still not our problem. So we have this kind of two attitudes which are very egoistic, I think. And we come to this question, who can be a refugee? Who can we help, or who can get help from us people? Those who have the power to help and who think that other creatures without us won't survive. We have these three categories or four categories. It depends how we look at those groups. We have non-human animals, which we don't know. Most of us don't care, don't see them. We have captive animals, which are in the zoos. They have purpose for us. They also mean money, so we care. We have also farm animals in this second group. They also mean a lot of us. A lot of us. They have the purpose to be our food, for example. So we care to not lose them. And we have this third category, the pets. They have very deep meaning to us because they are important. They are family members for us. They are our furry children. They are our cat, dog children. What kind of issues appear when we have disasters like war, for example. So, the situation for people who decide to abandon their homes and their animals is hard and stressful. They faced many problems. For example, the main one was the lack of pet containers and pet bags. In Warsaw railway station, the support for non-human refugees was given as well as in Krakow, where in the first few days of the crisis, the help center below platform 3, during first hours of work, distributed 50 pet carriers among people with animals who came from Ukraine. People were coming with birds, rats, cats, dogs, even snails, many of them in not appropriate conditions, as the supplies of pet carriers ended quickly. Hence, people were using boxes, jars, carriers for other animals, cages, and anything that could hold the pet inside. The need for carriers and bags in a less active period after the first move was 300 pet carriers and 100 pet bags. The second issue faced by refugees is lack of food for animals. The animal associations were trying to take care of the needs. The pets were tired, terrified, and didn't know what is going on. They were mentally withdrawn, not aggressive. They felt their own fear and their fear felt by their caregivers. So the emotions of the animals are the third issue here. As there are changed rules of conduct on the Polish border due to the humanitarian refugee crisis caused by the war, the problem doesn't concern most of the people who escaped the war. If the animals are vaccinated and microchipped, they can cross the border without any questions. If they are not, they can be microchipped and vaccinated on the spot. It takes some time, it is stressful, but the animals can stay with their caregivers and feel as safe as they can. Later, they cross the border together, carried on hands or shoulders, and in pet carriers or backpacks. The same rules operate on the borders with Romania, Hungary, and Slovakia. In one of the radio programs in Poland, there was the question, what can we do to help the animals right now in case of war? In my opinion, we shouldn't keep animals that have special needs, for example, snakes, exotic birds. As the lack of food, heat, electricity, current water can inflict the death of those animals. One of the Ukrainian snake breeders lost over 25 snakes and vipers from his collection due to heat and electricity loss, and temperature dropped below 10 degrees Celsius. He wrote, "No one of my reptiles survived. I lost my passion of 8 years of work in one day. Fact that there was 5 or 6 gravid females makes everything even worse." The other thing is that if we decide to have pets, we should think how many can be carried on our shoulders, metaphorically and physically. But most of all, as wrote Peter Singer and Alexandr Todorchuk, we must recognize animals not merely as property, but as sentient, sentient beings whose capacities to suffer and to enjoy life give them moral status. I would like to mention also the 5 domains for animal welfare assessment. The freedom from hunger and thirst, the freedom from discomfort, freedom from pain, injury, and disease, freedom from to express normal behavior, and freedom from fear and distress. We have these 3 groups of animals, and what can we do? How can we help them? In case of wild animals, Oleksiy Vasiliuk, an ecologist from the Ukrainian NGO connected with environment, said for hundreds of years, populations of big mammals were controlled, and now, for the first time, they are uncontrolled. For us, it is a great news. The areas of where the war is are undergoing an unintended and a bit unexpected rewilding. The number of wolves, wild boars, rare marble polecats, and endangered steppe marmots increase. This is a good information, but in case the animals are injured, we can place them in sanctuaries or the intervention veterinary centers forever or for the time of healing. We can also try to create infrastructure that could be helpful and could be used by the animals in situation of danger. As I was mentioning, those snails, for example, which were using our trash to escape the flood. So the second group, where we have captive animals, mostly captive in zoos or in private collections, and the farm animals. Animals which are kept in zoos. In the case of the war in Ukraine and the Ukrainian crisis, some of them were helped. For example, a Belgian animal shelter has taken in 2 young lions evacuated from Ukraine, twin males, Tsar and Jamil. They were transferred almost immediately, but there are more than 4,000 creatures in Kiev Zoo, over 200 species. And the staff of the zoo said that it is almost impossible to evacuate animals because it is hard to provide appropriate veterinary services and transportation. But, for example, Natalia Popova was the one person involved in evacuation of these captive animals. She feared that the captive animals in the city would either die from bombs or starvation. And over 80 animals reach Poland due to her cooperation with our sanctuaries and zoos. More difficult situation is with farm and domestic animals. They are always affected by wars, and they are treated as the weakest link because they are fully dependent on humans and mostly not able to defend or save themselves. Some farm animals are evacuated, for example, horses. Others can be released by hopeful owners who believe the animals have the best chance of surviving on their own. I'm not sure whether they have the chance to survive, but I don't know whether we can do anything more. Of course, the captive animals can be also kept and placed in sanctuaries. Many of them were or are still. We can let free and just have hope that they will survive. And some of them are just left for death, like those which were restrained in Poland in small cages. Undoubtedly, all animals, including livestock, during war are exhibiting the same feelings as humans. These are intense fear, panic, confusion. Moreover, sometimes people are unable to help them because of the lack of feed mixtures, destroyed roads, bridges, and dangers of transportation. But the situation in this category remains unclear, as well as for wild animals, because we don't count them. We don't know how many of them are there, how many were helped, how many were killed. We don't know that. If we look at the third group, pets, during wars, there can be observed the same kind of attitudes toward companion animals as during peace. They are important part of the family. They are called family members, not just a thing. This is nice and desired in this kind of situations, to just look at them not as something we own and we can do what we want with them, but someone that is dear to us. So if the animals are owned, therefore people kill them or not let the oppressors eat them or mistreat them. This is the case, for example, in Britain there was the cat massacre and the pet massacre before the Second War, where people decided that if the Germans will come, we won't let them eat our pets. So this is the same situation for people who cannot take their animals. They will decide to just kill the animal, not to let them be killed or mistreated by someone else. Some people abandon their pets. We know a lot about those creatures as the media covers their stories, which are told by volunteers and soldiers who take care of them. In this case, the Ukrainian soldiers. There are also people who decide to take animal companions or stay with them, no matter the consequences. The situation during the war in Syria showed how many animals were abandoned. For example, not all the cats, dogs, and farm animals who live in Ernesto's sanctuary for cats in Aleppo, Syria, were strays. The cause of abandoning animals can be that it is not allowed to take them, or people don't want to have more problems crossing borders. During 3 months of the conflict in Ukraine, we know that those abandoned pets try to find shelter with other people, with soldiers, or on their own. David Barrett, a director of the International Animal Welfare Organization called Network for Animals, said, "It is a terrible tragedy for animals, particularly cats and dogs, because the people had to flee very unexpectedly. Most weren't allowed to take their animals with them, so they had no choice but to abandon those poor creatures on the streets. These animals, who are not used to fending for themselves, now find themselves on the streets as victims of bombs and bullets. They are completely forlorn and helpless. They have very little chance of survival if we don't pay attention to them." As in Aleppo, there were people who stayed and decided to help abandoned animals. In Ukraine are also men and women who stay with rescues in animal shelters or create own shelters. The people who stayed in Ukraine also gain the humanitarian help as food for exotic birds, for example, mostly parrots. Some of the pets got used to the noise, the sound of guns and bombs. If they don't have any previous anxiety or trauma, can become something acceptable. Some journalists quote the statement of the Ukrainian president that the cats...
Łucja,
Yes?
we're up to time. We're at 10 past.
Yeah, I'm finishing. I have just, I think,
Okay.
2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you.
So the Ukrainian resident said that her cats surprisingly quickly got used to the roar that reminded them of the sound of the violent summer storms. But some of the dogs still went crazy and howled with fear. So there is no clear conclusion from me, only some thoughts. We are still not paying attention. We don't see animals for who they are. We are still not prepared for the friendship and solidarity with other creatures. We don't even have in our laws the term of non-human refugee. But we can have hope that in the time of danger and distress, we will be able to help one another. Thank you very much.